Joining us on the Guadalupe Radio Network to talk all about his vocation story to the priesthood and about his role at St. Mary's Seminary in Houston is Father Richard Hinkley. Father Richard Hinkley is an ordained priest from the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston, and he was ordained in June of 2014. Father Richard, thanks so much for being here. Welcome back to the KSHJ studio. It's since been renovated since you were here last, but we're glad to have you back.
It's great to be back, Wyatt. Thank you.
And of course, I've known you from way back when we had both gone to high school together at Strake Jesuit. A lot of great memories. Shout out to anybody who knows anything about SJET, Strake Jesuit Educational Television, which set me on this path to my career. But I want to ask you about the importance of Catholic education because it had a big impact on my life and your life as well.
Yes, I have been in Catholic education basically since kindergarten. So I started out at St. Francis de Sales Catholic Church and School there in Sharpstown. And then following graduation from there, I went to Strake Jesuit, which was just 3 blocks from my home. And my uncle had graduated from there in '76, Ramon Fernandez. And so, and then through undergraduate. So I don't think I would have been able to not only just be the person I am today, but also discern a vocation outside of that.
Yeah. And I know how important that community is to you. You are now the coordinator of spiritual formation at St. Mary's Seminary, which is great. I've been there to St. Mary's Seminary in Houston. It's a beautiful campus.
The gem.
Yes. And I think a lot of people, Father Richard, don't even realize that we have this beautiful place in Houston. For people who are unfamiliar, tell me about St. Mary's Seminary.
Sure. So the institution, I wish in part that Father Uriel Manzano, the rector, were here because he's really familiar with the history of the institution. But basically, we had our original site of the seminary was in LaPorte there.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have to remember back in the days when Galveston was the main polis in the area. And so in 1901, a seminary was founded there in LaPorte. Following the dredging of the ship channel, and as Houston began to grow and outshine Galveston as the major metropolitan center, the decision was made to move the seminary from LaPorte to Houston. And so they were looking at various sites. If I remember correctly, the current site at which the seminary is found on Memorial and Chimney Rock, so just north of the Galleria, that was one of the original sites planned for the University of St. Thomas.
Oh.
And at the time, so 1954, it was believed that that was too far outside of town for the university.
Okay.
And so the Basilian Fathers who owned the land sold it to the diocese at the time. And so that then began construction. And so the current site of St. Mary's Seminary was built in 1954. With additional buildings being added over time. In fact, the latest building being added in, when was it? 2021, which currently serves as the chief dormitory for the men studying there.
Yeah. And what's great about St. Mary's Seminary is that not only does it help to train seminarians that are local, but from all across the state of Texas. They come, and I know that, not only have you been there, but I know you've also spent time at the seminary in Irving, Texas as well. So
yes, Holy Trinity.
Yeah, so it really seems like we do a good job here in Texas of being able to kind of coordinate with all of the seminarians, and a lot of people really seem to know each other in that sense and get an education from all over.
Yes, for I think since its beginnings, St. Mary's has served not just for the diocese and now Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston, but for other dioceses in Texas and even beyond Texas. We've hosted seminarians from as far away as South Carolina, in fact.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so just depending on the season. So right now, you could say our chief client dioceses are, of course, Galveston-Houston, followed by Austin, and then, surprisingly enough, the Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter. And so the Ordinariate, which is you could say just a personal diocese that encompasses Canada and the U.S., their cathedral is Our Lady of Walsingham, which is just like a 5-minute drive on Chimney Rock north of the seminary. And so they use St. Mary's for the formation of most of their men.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great location. I think it can really draw people from all over. Tell me a little bit about what you do there, Father Richard, at St. Mary's Seminary as the coordinator of spiritual formation. What does that entail?
Yeah, so every seminary has to have a rector who governs. He's the pastor, you could say, of the seminary. And then he has a number of other faculty members that assist him in his work, because we have to lay aside the idea that seminary is just about acquiring intellectual and practical knowledge, but it's envisioned by the church chiefly as a transformation of the entire man. And obviously that transformation has already begun in the sacraments of initiation. But in preparation for the ministerial priesthood, there's additional configuration to Christ that has to take place. And it doesn't just magically happen with the graces given at holy orders. It takes years. And so many people balk. It's like, why does it take 7 to 10 years even for the formation of a man? It's like, well, these aren't habits that are acquired overnight, and you can't just cram to become a priest. Some of the knowledge you can kind of retain like that. And so men living in community, the current model, you could say, of formation is heavily dependent upon the model provided by St. Charles Borromeo. Before Borromeo in, if I remember, 16th century, priestly formation was very much like an apprenticeship model. And then with all the turmoil of the 16th century and before, the model proposed by St. Charles was one based more on, you could say, a monastic or maybe a mendicant house of formation. And so the men would live in common and have a common life. And since then, we've been trying to achieve kind of a balance. But in the course of their formation, there's a document called Pastores dabo vobis. That's Latin for "I will give you pastors," taken from Jeremiah. And in that post-synodal apostolic exhortation of Pope St. John Paul II, he lays out really the vision of priestly formation that continues to direct seminary formation even to today. And it envisions basically 4 dimensions of formation: the intellectual, the human, the pastoral, and the spiritual. And so the intellectual is pretty straightforward. The human is basically just that which we all have in common, the basic human virtues and being just a well-rounded, healthy human being. The pastoral deals largely with that missionary engagement with the people of God, so acquiring those skills and knowledge that will carry the man into parish ministry. And then the spiritual is really seen as the core that brings all of these dimensions together. And so my responsibilities are largely to serve as one among several spiritual directors. So in addition to being the coordinator, really the coordinator part of the title is like an event coordinator. So I coordinate to make sure that everyone has a spiritual director for the formation year. I also make sure that our weekends of recollection and our annual retreats, which are mandated by canon law, take place and are organized.
Very good, and that's so important. So then tell me, then you get to know the seminarians very well in that sense, right?
The spiritual director has a privileged relationship with the men. There are 2 priests that are essentially assigned to each seminarian. His priest formator, who represents the rector, since the rector can't really meet with, it's impractical for him to meet with everyone.
Yeah.
And so the priest formator is the one who chiefly evaluates the man. And at the end of the year, he composes an evaluation of the man that draws on all the experiences of the past year. And then that's used by the faculty, who can evaluate the man to make their judgment, their call. in terms of whether the man should continue in formation, be advanced, or whether that advancement should continue, but there are perhaps some areas that the man needs to focus on in order for his formation to continue successfully. The spiritual director is not involved in that level of evaluation. He doesn't vote on the man. And he's in a sense entrusted to the man by the church so that the seminarian doesn't feel like it's him versus a firing squad or him versus, the man. The spiritual director stands there. He obviously represents the concerns of the church, the priorities of the church, but he's also there to, you could say, walk by the side of the man to help him cultivate and deepen his relationship with God, the Most Holy Trinity, and with the saints, and also to help him perhaps hear those directives and those critiques of formation that are perhaps difficult for him to hear.
Yeah. One of the things I love about our church and about St. Mary's Seminary is that emphasis on having the proper foundation in all its aspects, spiritual, intellectual, all these things that you're talking about is so great because it sets them up for success to be whatever they're going to be as a priest, whether they're a pastor, parochial vicar, if they have a special role like you in which they are actually working at the seminary. I love that there's so much preparation because it's so important. I want to ask you, Father Richard, about your own vocation story. You had mentioned, your Catholic education and upbringing. You had gone to University of Notre Dame. Tell me, when did you start to get the inkling about being a priest? And then how did you start to think about, what kind of a priest, specifically Archdiocese or religious order, that kind of thing?
My vocation story is fairly basic, Wyatt.
Okay.
And that's good. That's good for the majority of guys discerning a vocation. It's fairly basic insofar as, what do I mean by that? I mean that I fall well within the norms of what studies show are the most successful contributing factors to discerning a vocation. And what are some of those chief factors? One, that the man spent time as an altar server, as an altar boy, so some type of ministerial, liturgical relationship to the priesthood, and also the role that a priest plays in identifying and inviting the young man, the potential seminarian, to consider a vocation to the priesthood. So growing up at St. Francis de Sales in Sharpstown, my mother, I think partly it was just the thing that you did after First Communion, and also to make it just easier for her, so she didn't have to worry about two children in the pew. So it gave me something to do instead of just bother my sister, and so idle hands and all that. So I was an altar server, and for a number of years, altar serving was just, okay, this is a nice activity. It makes the Mass go by a little bit faster, but especially beginning in 8th grade, when the responsibilities of the server came to be a bit more complicated. So, Father was depending upon you a bit more, especially if you were called to help. It was just great. There were the days when during the week, funerals frequently occur in the morning on weekdays. And so the parish office would call the school saying, we need a couple servers to help with a funeral, right? Either to minister with the book or to help with incense and things like that. And so that sense of being needed for the liturgical rites and coming to understand, coming to a place of perhaps leadership among the servers was all, just for an adolescent male. These are all things that are attractive and, they enthuse him. And then moving from there to Strake, I guess two things happened. One, I experienced just a moral conversion. I was baptized as an infant at Holy Ghost. But my moral conversion to the faith occurred there between freshman and sophomore year. And that's just grace. I wouldn't have been able to predict it probably even a year beforehand, but just being drawn to the lives of the saints and to the things that we were talking about in theology class, and then just the example of the Jesuit fathers there. You remember them as well as I do. He was briefly there, Father Zinnemann.
Yes.
Then Father Richard Toy, Father Christopher Billack, He's still there. Father Douglas Hippolyte, J.B. Leininger, and Father Folsenlogan. These men were quirky.
Right.
They were weird, and they were happy. They radiated the joy of loving Christ and knowing Christ and living the life of Christ. And that just was imbued in all they did, whether it was like Father Toy teaching us the Odyssey and how to diagram sentences, or whether it was just Father Billack in his theology class telling us not to be like the south end of a northbound mule. These were just really impactful men. And it you know, as frequently happens, you look at that and you say, okay, I think I could do that. And so I would say that really the seed of a priestly vocation began there, between witnessing and experiencing the pastoral life of the priest in the parish and the witness of these just quirky but certainly happy Jesuit fathers.
Yeah. They had a profound impact, and I think that it's interesting now that you and I are a little bit older, Father Richard, that we can look back on that and realize in hindsight how much of an impact that those Jesuit fathers had on us.
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
And like I said, they said that importance of that formation so that, whatever we may be called to, we have good examples in our lives of good people. So then, again, you continued to study theology at the University of Notre Dame. And like I said, that had helped you kind of continue, because I don't want to go into all of your education background.
Sure.
But you are a well-educated individual. And like I said, that's been, I'm sure, great for you and your role at St. Mary's Seminary and all these things that you've had to do, because I want to acknowledge that you've had a number of different roles since you were ordained. You've been a parochial vicar at St. Helen Parish in Pearland, St. John Vianney in Houston, St. Thomas More. You've really bounced around a lot. And I'm guessing the good part about that is you've learned a lot about Houston and a lot about Catholics here in our Archdiocese.
I love our Archdiocese, like, I want to say most of the priests, all the priests, hopefully.
Yeah.
No, our Archdiocese is absolutely wonderful. And all of my priestly assignments have been just rich with blessings, especially the people of this Archdiocese. From even when I spent a summer as a transitional deacon up at St. Anthony's and the Woodlands, a couple months at St. Joseph's as the temporary parish administrator. All of these just rich experiences have been, they leave an imprint. They leave an imprint on you as a priest. And, it's a bit cliche to say it, but the people, they form you, they shape you, they help you mature as a priest. And so I'm just grateful to have all these experiences, and the pastors of the various churches. Father Hai Dang, then he's since retired. Father James Corville, Father Troy Gately, and yes, and when I was at St. Anthony's, it was Father Tom. Completely blanking. Father Tom begins with an R. I want to say Father
Rafferty.
Rafferty, thank you. I want to say Father Tom Reitmeyer, but he's out in Austin.
Yes.
Father Tom Rafferty.
Yeah. A lot of people love Father Tom Rafferty.
Absolutely, especially if you need tickets to a sporting event.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, among all these things that you've done and gone out to all these churches, I want to say you still had this one hobby that I've heard about, because you did an interview with my colleague Tim Mott a while back and mentioned that you have a liking to beekeeping?
Absolutely. Apiarists of the world unite. Yes, I was...
You had mentioned the priest at Jesuit being quirky. You got to admit, Father Richard, you're a little quirky yourself.
I humbly admit that. But beekeeping is just... You get to essentially have a relationship with this creature, this society that I think represents almost like an alien life form sharing the earth with ourselves. Bees are just such fascinating creatures. There's so much about them we know. There's even so much more about them that we don't know. I was introduced to them really through a retreat at St. Joseph's Abbey out in Louisiana, just north of Covington.
And they have bees out there.
They do. They have a very thriving, at least when I was out there, I think like 90 hives. And meeting with the apiarists there, and just, the honey production, the wax production that they do. I think they also produce some other bee products.
Wow.
But anyway, so I met some parishioners, also had attended Notre Dame at St. Helens. And we started this kind of joint venture of, I forgot how many hives we had at once, maybe 6 or so hives. And it's, you have to be okay being stung a couple times. But
I imagine.
But suiting up in the suits, and you want to take care of the bees. And so there's a way of, feeding the bees and making sure that their feed has, probiotics and other things. And you want to treat the hives to prevent, parasites and other things taking over. But, the bees, they've served since patristic times as a model for Christian life. They live in community, they're poor and yet industrious. Even their means of reproduction was considered analogous to the procession of the Son from the Father. And so whether it's St. Ambrose or, other medieval voices, the bees have always. So even St. Augustine talks about it, a new colony of bees, like the catechumens in initiation. And so, the bees have so much to offer us. Obviously, we've relied on the bees for candle wax for centuries. They even get a shout out during the Exultet, during the Easter Vigil. Bees are great.
And I want to give you credit for at least trying. You've proposed the idea of having some beehives on the campus of St. Mary's Seminary.
Yeah, we certainly have enough property, in Houston. So this is just, PSA for you all out there. There really aren't any laws about, keeping bees. You just don't want them to become a nuisance to your neighbors or anything like that. And so, we're looking into that. It takes a while to set up the hives, and so we've got a lot to work on at the seminary, and so lots of projects to juggle at once. But I'd love to see beekeeping be one of the projects that gets underway.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see if it comes to fruition. Well, we'll know where the idea was planted with them. You had mentioned before that the bees are almost like a little bit kind of like an alien race, a little bit like that. Father Richard, I remember hearing one of your homilies when you were filling in as a celebrant at St. Teresa in Memorial Park, probably last year.
Okay.
In which you made a reference to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
The best Star Trek movie ever
which
made.
Which is a science fiction classic from 1982. My question is, when you make reference to that and kind of, expose your nerdum, your inner nerdum, how do you expect the people in the pews to react to that? Because there's a good amount of us that would know what that is, and then there's a good amount of maybe young people that were born after 1982 that would have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, and I would include myself. I was born in '84, and so, but no, that's a good point. And this does get into the subject of how to do homiletics. And so, generally, when I include like a reference to something like Wrath of Khan, I consider it a bit of an Easter egg of sorts. And so, So
you don't have to get it to understand the homily.
Exactly. But if you do get it, it's kind of like, oh, I know what he's talking about. Khan, when Kirk's there, seemingly buried alive. And so, so those kind of things are often fun for, those who are perhaps like in the know in the congregation. But otherwise, no, I would hope that neither myself nor others, when they're preaching, because that can also be a bit alienating, when you're listening to a homily.
Perfect word. Alienating.
There you go.
Yeah.
Alienating because, Father makes a reference. It's like, okay, you can't understand my point unless you've seen this movie. There's one homily I remember in particular. He referenced the movie Cocoon.
Okay, I remember it's obscure.
Yeah, and also like an alien theme, right? You have these folks in a spa or a retirement community.
Okay.
But again, if you haven't seen the movie Cocoon, it's like, okay, the message is kind of lost.
Right.
So.
Very interesting. Well, I'm glad you tried to work in some of those Easter eggs there for people who will get it. And I assume that's kind of part of the beauty of the homilies, is also the fact that each priest, like yourself, kind of brings their own unique world experience to it and kind of adds some flavor to it.
Yeah, in terms of the celebration of the Mass, I think the priest's personality, to the degree it comes out, the homily is the appropriate place for that. Otherwise, he should be like our cardinal frequently says at the homily at ordination masses. The priest should be as interesting as a glass of water.
Okay, very good. But a glass of water, very healthy for you.
Absolutely.
Very good. Excellent. Father Richard, I want to thank you so much. Before we go, one last question. Advice for anybody who's discerning priesthood, religious life, trying to figure out what their vocation is.
Don't be afraid. Christ doesn't intend to take anything from you that is necessary for your happiness, but only to amplify your happiness. So a vocation, whether to the priesthood or the religious life, is a gift. And if we're generous with the Lord, he never allows us to be more generous than he is with us. So yeah, just to echo those words of JP2 and now of Pope Leo XIV, don't be afraid.
Very good. Father Richard Hinkley, coordinator of spiritual formation at St. Mary's Seminary in Houston. Thank you so much for your time. We're so glad that you're here today.
Thank you, Wyatt.